Easter really is at the heart of that mystery of faith that we as Christians and specifically as Catholics believe in, try to understand and also try to celebrate in the world. Easter really is a key point in the whole history of salvation, that story of God's love for the world, the love story between God and humanity, as Pope Benedict described it. There is that assertion at the beginning of the Bible that we're made in God's image and likeness, and then despite all the evil of the Old Testament, from Adam and Eve onwards, God so loved the world, as St. John's Gospel tells us, that he sent his only Son. And Christians believe that somehow or other on Good Friday, Jesus on the cross absorbed all the sin of the world. All the sin of the world from Adam and Eve up to wars and greed and violence and brutality were absorbed by Jesus, and it crushed him. And his rising on Easter Sunday wasn't just a saying, I'm back again, or just pretending I was dead. It's actually Jesus saying, by his being raised from the dead, that the worst that human beings can do to one another cannot destroy God's plan for the world, God's dream for the healing of the world, and the ability of God's grace to work for the healing of the human heart. So that's really at the centre of the mystery of God's salvation of the world. And therefore we celebrate it constantly, not just for a few days in the year, but really throughout the year as the mystery that we try to understand and to celebrate and to bring to reality in our own lives. Those 7 weeks of Easter give us a number of figures from the Scriptures that I think we can look at, we can walk with, we can share our journey with. The first of them, it's important for us to remember, the first witnesses to the risen Lord were Mary Magdalene, were the women who loved him with their hearts, who thought beyond what the men did, that Jesus couldn't rise again. They realised that the God of love and the love of God couldn't be crushed in the grave. And even if he were to be in the grave, Mary Magdalene was prepared to come back in some of the stories with her companions to try and love the Lord even in his death. So I think Mary Magdalene, the one who loved the Lord even right through his death, who hadn't abandoned him like so many of the other followers did. Secondly, there's Thomas, the one who wanted to believe but needed to be convinced, and then who, once he had the experience of the risen Lord, gave his whole heart, his whole confession of my Lord and my God to Jesus. And perhaps the third companions that the Scripture gives us are the two, whoever they were, two men, two women, man and woman, on the road to Emmaus. Those people who come with their story of disappointment, who walk with the Lord, whose hearts burn within them as they hear Jesus retelling the story of the Old Testament in a new way, and who then, once they encounter the Lord in the breaking of bread, rush back to their companions in Jerusalem. I think all of those characters are humans with a warm human heart, with a searching for the truth and for a real encounter with the risen Jesus. I think they're important companions for us on our own Easter journey to come to terms with both the death and the mystery of Christ's resurrection. I think the idea of hope is important. And that's much more than optimism. In that important letter of Pope John Paul II to the Church in Europe from 2003, 5 of the 6 chapters contained the word hope. That Jesus was the hope, proclaiming the message of hope, celebrating the message of hope, witnessing to the message of hope. I think there's a recognition that not only is our churches as Christianity going through a period of crisis, but there's also a humanistic crisis, particularly in Western Europe and in many of the countries that share our stage on the curve of cultural development. And I think it's important for Christians, yes, in the middle of all the various specific negative experiences that they might have, whether it be the problems with the credibility of church in modern society and the pain and doubts of many, whether it's with the apparent inability of the economic model that we have to deliver the salvation that many people were told they could find in economic success. I think our task is to say, how can we as people who have walked with the Lord to the cross and walked with the Lord through the cross to the resurrection, how can we ensure that we serve the human need for hope? Not just a belief that things might work all right, will work out all right, but actually a conviction that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, there is more good in the world than evil. Grace is stronger than sin, that there is more hope than despair. And just thus, at a particular time, serve our fellow men and women and serve our society by actually giving a message, yes, it is possible, through the grace of God, for evil, for death, for destruction, for meaninglessness to be overcome. And that with the grace of the God who desires so much the healing of the world, that a better future can be created, not just by some sort of economic or political utopia, but through a transformation of the human heart, and not just through a transformation of structures. And therefore I think we have a whole new service to render to our society by being people of hope, and precisely because we find ourselves as churches in a difficult place, finding ways of generating genuine hope of healing and salvation through the grace of God, through our own experience, that we might then, to others who are experiencing pain in many different ways, be a sign that transformation is possible, and that the message of Christ is an ideal way to access that transformation that we all hunger for, and that God hungers for as well. I suppose because the mystery of Christ's death on the cross and his resurrection really are the kernels of the Gospels, because those stories were the ones that were told initially at the beginning, and then the rest of the Gospel stories in many ways were written round that, building up to that, because those were the stories that reinterpreted not just the life of Jesus, but the whole of the Old Testament. I think it's important that we're aware of that transforming power that is portrayed in the Gospel through the resurrection of Jesus. It's really why we are a people who celebrate the Eucharist, sometimes on a daily basis, but for many people on a weekly basis, where we're actually engaging not just with a static presence of Christ on the altar, but a Jesus who begins with Holy Thursday evening, where all the human dreams of the apostles for success, for Jesus who would lead them to victory, have been shattered. He's going to be arrested, he's going to be killed. And then the Eucharist brings us through that Last Supper, through the pain of his sacrificial death on the cross, to sharing in his transforming resurrection on Easter Sunday. So we are Easter people precisely because that power of Christ to transform and to heal is what's at the core of our understanding of who we are as human beings. And therefore we celebrate that regularly, that the mystery of faith that is so important to us, that dynamic, salvific mystery of faith, not just a static presence of Christ on the altar, can be at the core of who we are as a Eucharistic community. And that therefore, as the Eucharistic Congress title for 2012 underlines, celebrate that communion between ourselves and God, and that communion with one another. In that sense, we can become the sacrament of Jesus, who is the sacrament of God in the world, and therefore work for the healing and for the salvation of all of the human race.